Oye, oye, oye. No honorable judge presiding. So we begin our afternoon session, which I think you'll find is very complementary to the themes that we looked into this morning. There is a common denominator, a common theme for the whole day, and that is of attention itself. And the etymology of this term in English, going back to its Latin roots, is worth dwelling on, worth remembering. It goes back to the Latin roots, which mean to attend to, in the sense of watch over, look after, and care for. So a shepherd watching his sheep, a mother tending to her children, and so on. And so even though that's really a Latin etymology, and I don't see it reflected in the Sanskrit or the Pali terms for attention, nevertheless, I think it really strikes the right ambience, or the feel, for the quality of awareness, the way we're cultivating attention here, that it's not a taskmaster, it's not here to judge, it's not incriminating, it's not harsh, but rather it's tending to, looking after, watching over. And years ago, must have been quite a few years ago, a very dear friend of mine, Lawrence Freeman, a Benedictine monk, and I were leading a retreat over in La Casa de Maria. And we had a lovely, I think it was 1 day, maybe 2 days. And Lawrence made a comment at that time that stuck with me ever since. And as a very devout, really wonderful man, very devout Benedictine monk, he commented that the greatest gift we can offer to another person is our attention. Our attention. Now he's a wise man, he's been around the block, around the globe many, many times. So he knows that in many circumstances what people need from us is more than our attention. Perhaps they need money or food or companionship, love, and so forth. But if we don't give them attention, if we don't tend to others, then the likelihood of anything else they need being given by us is basically zero. So attending to being the first task in terms of our interpersonal relationships. When I made this very lightweight allusion to Truman Capote as he was portrayed in this film, so who knows how accurate it was, but it was a good film, I thought. And one of the things they said about this man was that he had an exceptional ability to do two things, which as a combination are very rare. Exceptional ability to listen and an exceptional ability to talk. That he could actually do both. A lot of people are good at one or the other, but not both. And he, certainly as depicted in this film, was very, very good at both. And so being able to offer our attention to those around us, whether it's the person across the counter in a supermarket, or people that we encounter in the business place or at home and so forth, is our first gift. And then we bring, for the practice we'll be doing this afternoon, we bring this same gift, we direct the same quality of awareness to our own minds. Now clearly this could be done in a myriad of ways, and I think we've already checked out a myriad of ways. Getting very upset with ourselves, upset with old replicating thoughts that we've all experienced, or emotions that we feel are really tired and worn out, but they keep on coming and coming. Desires that we find just kind of like just a nuisance, or just, upsetting. And so we know about these ways of attending to the mind, and that is doing so with harshness, being judgmental, impatient, and so forth. The quality of attention we'll be cultivating this afternoon in this practice called settling the mind in its natural state is much more in accord with the original etymology of our English term, attention as intend to. So I'll speak just a few more minutes, and then we'll go right to the practice. The practice is called, as I said, settling the mind in its natural state. Now what is meant by that is natural as in the sense of not modified, not contrived, not artificial, not configured. Not configured. Now our mind in its active state, in its configured state, is locked into a whole framework, heavily modified by biology, heavily modified by language, personal history, our gender, level of education, personal background, and so forth. Nothing wrong with that. But this is really an adventure. Again, one of the words I like very much from the English language is expedition. I've now grown fond of both terms that would be used for a one-day retreat, a one-week retreat, a three-week retreat. Retreat in the sense of temporarily withdrawing to reassess, to reconsider, to re-strategize in order to launch back out into whatever activity we have in mind with greater clarity, ingenuity, novelty, effectiveness. So retreat, I'm actually quite comfortable with that term. I wasn't for a long time, but now I'm pretty happy with it. But retreat on the one hand is clearly a preparation for something else. All right? If you're engaging in a battle and you simply retreat and then run for the hills and never show up again, I think we call that defeat. Whereas retreat as something that is calculated, something that is methodical and intentional, as a time to regroup, to re-strategize, to rethink, then that means it's part of the ongoing fray. And so the phase 2 following retreat would be maybe expedition. And here's a term, again, I've mentioned it many times in earlier retreats. And the connotation here, going back to the Latin roots, is exped. That is, you're getting your feet, your ped, out of something where they've been stuck. So setting out on an expedition etymologically is getting unstuck from old ruts, places where our feet have gotten stuck. Setting out in novel ways, new ways, more ingenious ways, perhaps more beneficial and thoughtful ways. And so I think the balance between these two, of retreat and expedition, well characterizes what we're doing here in one day, what can be done for 3 months, and so forth. So this is an expedition into the nature of the mind. It is taught in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, so this morning was really largely from the Theravada Buddhist tradition, but again, so universal that I think Buddhists, non-Buddhists, anybody could well relate to it, derive benefit from it, including small children. This afternoon is really drawn overwhelmingly from the Tibetan tradition, especially what are called the Mahamudra and Dzogchen traditions of contemplative practice and theory in Tibetan Buddhism, really oriented to fathoming the nature of awareness itself and multiple dimensions of awareness. So in speaking of settling the mind in its natural state, this entails profoundly a sense of release, and that is releasing out of old configurations, patterns, types of grasping, and so forth, releasing into a deeper sense of consciousness that is more fluid, that is less configured, less determined, less predetermined by sheer habit and reaction, stimulus, and response than is our normal habit. So settling the mind in its natural state, where it is least relatively, and this is an ongoing process, relatively unconfigured, undetermined, unformed by habits, by personal history and so forth, entering into a state of freshness, uncontrived, natural, again, very fluid. That's kind of the mode here. It is taught as a shamatha practice within Tibetan Buddhism. Shamatha, as Vidya mentioned right at the outset, is simply a Sanskrit term pertaining to a whole matrix of practices designed to enhance attention skills, or conversely, to overcome detrimental attentional imbalances, so excitation, laxity, and so forth. So, it's approached as a shamatha practice, which means that 2 faculties of mind are being cultivated, refined, utilized. One of these is mindfulness. So in this context, it's a very traditional context. I'm using old definitions here, with the awareness that nobody is a word police, nobody has the absolutely right definition to any term, because they're human inventions after all. The mindfulness in the traditional meaning of this word in Buddhism means an ongoing flow of not-forgetfulness, of non-forgetfulness. So, as we saw from the citation from the Buddha and another of the great adepts in the Buddhist tradition, a primary connotation of mindfulness is actually remembering something that took place in the past. You all had breakfast this morning, I presume. You knew what you had for breakfast, and now you can probably remember what you had for breakfast. So that's an exercise of retrospective mindfulness. Now, when we were practicing mindfulness of breathing, you're not trying to remember the breath that went by a second ago, or let alone how you breathed when you were asleep last night, and so forth, but rather it's an ongoing flow, a present-centered flow of recollectedness, an ongoing flow of not forgetting what you set out to do, which means you're remembering what you set out to do, and that is for 20 minutes or what have you, I'm going to attend to my breath and see if I can cultivate attentional stability, coherence. So it's an ongoing flow of not forgetfulness, in a way remembering something you decided to do in the past, and that is when you first sat down to meditate, what did you do it for? But more importantly or explicitly, it's an ongoing flow of not forgetfulness in the present moment to maintain what you had set out to do. So that there is retrospective mindfulness, present-centered mindfulness, and then there's prospective mindfulness. And this is looking ahead. This is looking to the future and remembering to do something in the future. Okay? So this is a very central practice in the modern discipline of lucid dreaming, the ancient Buddhist practice of dream yoga, is as you're falling asleep, all right? As you're falling asleep, you can assume that it's very likely about 90 minutes after you fall asleep that you'll be in your first dream cycle. It may be relatively short, but you'll probably be dreaming in about 90 minutes after you conk out. And so prospective memory in this context, actual training, is as you are falling asleep to almost like cast the line, as if you were a fisherman, cast the line of your attention to the future, and to recall, to have a resolve tonight when I find myself in any environment other than my bed, I will have that be a cue for me to recognize that I'm dreaming, and I will remember to do something. All right? This is a Stephen LaBerge technique. I will remember to jump up in the air. As soon as I know that I'm dreaming, I will jump up in the air. This will reinforce my recognition that I'm dreaming, and then launch into, a lucid dream. But this is prospective memory, so that's in a meditative practice, but we do this all the time. And that is perhaps among two spouses, one is at work, and let's say it's a man staying at home, the woman's heading off to work, and the man says, "Oh, honey, when you come back, when you drive home after work tonight, please pick up some carrots and some lettuce. We want to have a nice salad tonight." And so hours goes by, and the woman is out there working, doing her work, and her mind was filled with many activities. The day's work is finished at the office, she gets into the car, hits the ignition, and she's driving home. Now, she wasn't remembering all along. She had all kinds of things to do in the workplace. She's not thinking carrots and lettuce, carrots and lettuce, carrots and lettuce. We shouldn't really have to do that. No, she's thinking about all kinds of other things. But she's cued herself that she doesn't think about carrots and lettuce every half an hour while she's dealing with other things, but she cues herself when she hits the ignition and is driving home. That's the time for the little images of carrots and lettuce to rise in the mind. Ah, yes, Jack asked me to pick up some carrots and lettuce, and I will do that. Why not? And so that's prospective memory. So it works past tense, present tense, future tense. In this practice, settling the mind in its natural state, we are exercising mindfulness. It is present-centered mindfulness, as in the practice of mindfulness of breathing, as in really all shamatha practices. You're focusing on something in the present. In addition to that, we will employ and refine our faculty of introspection, which means it's kind of like quality control, the monitoring of the meditative process, so that if we slip into just a stream of distracting thoughts and we get caught up in them, or we slip into, let me use the old cliche, the nodding acquaintance with meditation, especially at 2:15 on a hot afternoon, where you're meditating. So you're slipping into dullness, you're slipping into laxity, into sleep, you're on the slippery slope to taking a snooze, that you recognize that before other people recognize that you're snoring. And that you pick it up quickly. Okay? So this is introspection as a monitoring of the meditative process, a monitoring of the quality of mindfulness. So as I mentioned, this practice of settling the mind in its natural state is a shamatha practice, which means it's there. The whole purpose of the practice is to aid us in cultivating a deeper sense of bodily and mental ease, relaxation, comfort, greater sense of inner calm, stillness, stability, greater acuity, vividness, clarity of attention. So it has the same agenda, same purpose. But this practice we'll be going into very shortly then has some real added perks, some derivative benefits, that we're not simply focusing on the breath, the sensations of the breath, but we're now focusing, and which are on the way an ongoing flow, that is, they're always changing, but they're changing in rather predictable ways. That is, if you breathe in, you know what's coming next. There's going to be an out-breath. Most of the time, if you breathe out, there will be an in-breath, but there are exceptions to that rule. Okay? But as long as we're in good health, the in-breath follows the out-breath follows the in, so it's rather predictable, and frankly, it's very soothing. If it's done well, it's very soothing. As I said earlier this morning, it's very good for the body and the mind. Now, when settling the mind in its natural state, instead of focusing our mindfulness upon the sensations of the breath, for example, at the apertures of the nostrils, and settling the mind in its natural state, we're bringing the full force of our attention, the mindfulness, the flow of not forgetfulness, to the space of the mind. And what this means is that we have, let's say, using the word metaphorically, space as in field, as in domain of experience. Field of experience, domain of experience. We have 6 domains. 6 domains. So right here we see the ellipse. If you have 2 eyes both functioning, you have an elliptical field of the visual. 2 eyes gives us an ellipse. So there it is, and various types of colors, shapes and so forth are rising within that. You can, with eyes closed or open, you can direct your attention to the auditory field. In fact, I think I'd rather do this rather than talk about it. So I'll talk about it just a tiny bit more, then we'll jump right in. We have 6 fields of experience. For each of the 5 physical senses, eyes, ears, nose, taste, touch, 5. And the Buddhist premise is, maybe false, maybe true, but the Buddhist premise is that these 5 fields of experience, that which we directly perceive with the eyes, the ears, and so forth, that these are non-overlapping fields. Even in cases of synesthesia, where one has a sense of hearing colors, for example. The Buddhist understanding would be you're not literally hearing colors, you're seeing a color closely affiliated with, due to some interesting brain chemistry, a particular sound. And so there can be a conflation of the auditory and the visual, but you're not literally hearing colors, you're not literally seeing sounds. But again, that's debatable, it's open, not a point of dogma. The Buddhist premise here, true or false, is that these 5 fields, the visual, auditory, and so forth, are non-overlapping. That is, what you directly pick up with the eyes, you don't get with the ears. What you get with the ears, you don't get with the nose, and so forth. There are 5 non-overlapping fields. And then we have the 6th mode of perception. And that is, the mind is not just a calculating machine, it's not just a recollecting instrument. We not only imagine and recall and figure out with problem solving and so forth, but mental awareness is a 6th door of perception by means of which we can directly perceive. As we directly perceive with the eyes, we directly perceive with the ears. We perceive realities that are being presented to us from moment to moment, but purely with mental awareness, mental perception. Now, among the 6 modes of perception, there is some malleability in terms of the visual. That is, if you do a lot of eye exercises and they're very skillful, you might be able to accentuate your seeing a little bit. Some people are really professionally trained there. Certainly, you can train your ear to pick out specific notes of the scale and so forth. Maybe, I don't know, maybe if you're starting to lose your hearing, maybe something can be done by training to regain your hearing. I don't know. Nose, smell, taste, they're malleable, but not terribly, not a whole lot. That is, we can't do visual exercises and suddenly start seeing what let's say a bumblebee sees. We can't train our hearing and pick up, oh, I just picked up sonar, Not very trainable. But among our 6 modes of perception, there is one that is exceptionally malleable, plastic. You can expand its bandwidth, you can enhance its clarity, and that is mental perception. That one really can be enhanced. There's no question in my mind. It can be. This has been replicated, done many, many centuries. This is one out of 6 fields or modes of perception that can be enhanced through training, and that is specifically a function of this meditation. So in settling the mind in its natural state, we can attend mentally to phenomena that can be seen only with mental awareness. Colors you can pick up with a camera. They can be sensed with various modes of technology. Clearly, there are machines that pick up sounds, can replicate sounds. And for smells, why not? Taste, to some extent, why not? Heat and cold, for sure. Solidity and softness, for sure. So that we have instruments of technology that can detect, perhaps, I presume mindlessly, but can detect the contents of our 5 physical senses. But thoughts, emotions, directly, pick up the brain correlates quite possibly. Pick up the behavioral expressions, why not? But the actual thought itself, the memory itself, the emotion, the desire, the dreams, the contents of your dreams. I've worked with people who spent their whole professional lives studying sleeping and dreaming. There is not a machine that's ever been devised that you can put onto your head and it can tell you what you're dreaming about. There's only one mode of perception that provides us with immediate access to the mind. And that's the mind. Mental perception. So this, I think, in any, looking for the word, very well grounded, very truly empirical study of the mind would have the direct observation of the mind be the central pillar, the central thrust, the primary method. If you would not like to understand the mind, first of all, first, foremost, and always, as William James said, look at it. Take the approach to the mind that Galileo took to celestial phenomena. He didn't just advance the mathematics. He didn't come up with some new astrological theorems. of terrestrial correlates related to planets and stars and so forth. No, he did something very novel in the history of science. He actually devised sophisticated means for directly observing the moon, the sun, planets, stars, and saw things that no one in the history of humanity had never ever seen before because of the sophisticated modes of observation. William James, 3 centuries later, said that psychology during his era was where astronomy was prior to Galileo. Very good at looking at correlates, brain correlates, behavioral correlates, verbal reports, all of which astrologers did something like that. They would study the terrestrial correlates of the movements of the stars and planets and so forth. But the astrologers working for millennia before Galileo never figured out that the moon had craters, never saw that there are moons rotating around Jupiter, or that the sun has spots, or, very importantly, that if you observe Venus very closely, you'll see it has phases, just like the moon has phases, which indicates that it's actually moving around the sun, rather than vice versa. So, this is a first step towards a truly empirical scientific study of the mind, to develop refined means of observation of the mind itself. And with that, why don't I stop talking, at least in this mode. Let's go right to practice. You're welcome to either be supine or sitting, whatever you find most comfortable. Both are perfectly suitable for this practice. We'll begin the session by having the eyes very gently closed. And we'll begin as we've done before this morning by first of all settling the body in its natural state. It's like laying out a welcome mat. As you step into the chamber of meditation, letting your awareness slip into and fill this field of tactile sensations from the soles of the feet to the crown of the head. Especially as you breathe out, let this be the occasion for relaxing muscles that are unnecessarily tight. For this practice, we don't need to flex any of the muscles in the face at all. So entirely relax your face, soften the eyes. Let there be a feeling of spaciousness in your forehead between the eyebrows, just the opposite of contraction. Set your body at ease. When you are comfortable, let the body be still. Unnecessary movement tends to jar the attention, to unsettle the mind. If you're sitting, let your spine be straight, your sternum slightly uplifted, so that with each breath, even a shallow breath, you feel the sensations of the breath go down to the belly, which expands during inhalation. Now, once again, we'll take on quite a subtle challenge, and that is to allow the breath, which is so easy to modify, easy to control within certain parameters, to take up the challenge of closely observing the breath, the sensations of the breath throughout the body, quite capable of modifying the breath, extending it, slowing it down, speeding it up, and not doing so. Having the ability to control the breath and giving up such control. Giving up even influence. And just let the breathing be, flowing of its own accord. Utterly let go with every out-breath. Release the tension in the body. Immediately release any thoughts, memories, and so on that arise in the mind. We don't need to think all the time. Let your awareness rest in a passive, but very attentive mode. Now, as a preliminary exercise, let's take a very brief tour of these various domains of experience. Let your eyes become open. Bring the full force of your mindfulness to this visual domain, but do so in a mode of what has been called bare attention. It's not an absolute, but it is a mode of awareness in which the reactivity is held to a minimum. Tendency of conceptual projection held to a minimum. As the Buddha suggested, in the scene, let there be just the scene. What is reality dishing up to you, moment by moment, within this visual field? Attend closely. Without the projections of I like, I don't like, mine, not mine. Simply be aware of its arising within this field of experience. And let's close the eyes. Redirect the awareness in this mode of bare attention to the auditory field, the domain of experience of sounds. In the same way, just let the sounds, be heard as sounds without all of the conceptual context, conceptual projections, labeling. Without the like and don't like. Redirect your awareness now to the olfactory domain of experiences, domain of smells, fragrances. Is there anything in the air? Then to the gustatory, the domain of taste, Are there any lingering tastes in your mouth from your meal? Or does the mouth itself have a taste? The palate. For example, we move right on to the tactile field. Now bring the same quality of bare attention to the entire field of your body, on the interior and on the surface. In the felt, let there be just the felt. With bare attention, simply attend to the sensations arising from moment to moment. And now you may ask yourself, and I invite you to do so, is there any other immediate content of experience that you've not already perceived by means of the 5 physical senses? Is anything else happening immediately within your own experience? And I would answer, the answer is certainly yes. Discursive thoughts, internal chit-chat, mental images pertaining to memories and fantasies, emotions and desires, a whole array, a complex, diverse array of mental events are arising from moment to moment which you can directly perceive. So we now begin the main practice of settling the mind in its natural state. For this, if we follow tradition, which I think has a lot to be said for it, let your eyes be at least partially open. Your gaze resting vacantly in the space in front of you without fixing on any visual object. Your eyes open but vacant as if you were lost in daydreaming. But in this practice you're not lost at all. As the eyes are open but vacant, direct the full force of your attention to this 6th domain of experience. The domain of experience of uniquely mental events that cannot be perceived or directly detected by any other sense or by any instrument of technology. If you've not done this practice, you may wonder where to look. Where is this domain? Above, below? Is it inside my head? In my body someplace, or outside the body? The location, the dimensions of this field of experience are basically defined in a pragmatic sense by its contents. So if you've not done this practice before, you might find it helpful as a preliminary exercise to deliberately and rather ponderously generate a thought, a discursive thought, such as the thought, this is the mind. Syllable by syllable, generate this thought, and as you do so, direct the full force of your attention to that thought. Observe it arise within the space of the mind. Observe the thought dissolve back into that space, and once it's done so, keep your attention right where it was. You have already focused in the space of the mind, ready for the next thought or mental image to arise spontaneously. Whatever comes up, whatever thought, image, or what have you, whatever arises, just let it be. Observe the nature of the mental event without reacting to it, without projecting upon it. Simply observe its nature, watching it rise, watching it be present, watching it dissolve back into the space of the mind. We observe this space of the mind to the best of our ability without preference, not preferring for there to be no thoughts versus thoughts, not preferring one kind of a thought over another. Just watching, witnessing. Let your body and mind be loose, relaxed, soft from the core. This is not a tight practice. If your awareness grows vague, you may crystallize it once again by bringing to mind something very explicit. It could be a mental image, a piece of fruit, your home, the image of your car, or some loved one. Bring the image to mind very deliberately. Focus on it single-pointedly. Allow it to slip back into the space of the mind. And keep your attention right where it was, placed in the space of the mind, with the object of mindfulness being that space of the mind and whatever arises within it. We are cultivating mindfulness of the space of the mind and its contents. In addition, we employ the faculty of introspection, monitoring the quality of mindfulness, so that when we do get caught up in thoughts, carried away to the there and then, as opposed to the here and now, we quickly recognize it. And as soon as we recognize that the mind has been caught up in distraction or excitation, let the first response be one of relaxing more deeply. Loosening up and simply observing the thought rather than banishing it. Releasing the grasping onto the thought. And settling in the here and now. But excitation and distraction are only one of two attentional imbalances, the other being laxity, dullness, getting spaced out. When you find yourself slipping into that imbalance, having no object at all, just spacing out, freshly arouse your attention, take a fresh interest in the space of the mind and its contents. Observe closely. Arouse the vividness of your attention. And let's bring this session to a close. If you're in the supine position, very gently, smoothly roll out of that posture. Voilà, so. On occasions you might find that your mind gets upset, turbulent, quite difficult to bear. On such occasions, for whatever reason, some internal movement or something that's happened in our lives with other people and so on, but when the mind gets very turbulent, very upsetting, we can be looking for strategies. How do I deal with this? The mind seems to be out of control. It's really beating me up. This could be like being in a sailing vessel out in the Caribbean right now, near Cuba, where this Class 3 hurricane is sweeping through. If you're on the surface of the water, I imagine it's pretty brutal. It's throwing you around a lot, and you have no control. I mean, there it is. The wind is up, the waves are up, and you're just being thrown here and there. And you might wonder, gosh, is there any relief here? Is there any way out of this turbulence? It's so upsetting. And of course, if you're in a submersible, there is. If you're in a submarine, get off the surface for heaven's sakes. Go ahooga, ahooga, and go down just 100 feet. And even if it's 50-foot waves on the surface, if you go down 100 feet, 150 feet, problem solved. Quiet down there, serene, no sign of any hurricane, I presume. Maybe a bit of current here, a bit of current there, but no big deal. In a similar fashion, when the mind is experiencing, a Class 3 hurricane, one way of getting out of the mess, so we just don't get beat up so much. Again, this is not a real solution or a healing of the mind from the root, but it certainly is some very nice first aid. It's just to slip the awareness out of the conceptual mode. Where we get beat up is pretty much in the conceptual mode. Emotions are arising, but the emotions are hinged to concepts, memories, imagination, and so forth. And so where we're getting beat up, it tends to be in exactly that conceptual mode of awareness. Go ahooga, ahooga in your mind and slip down 50 feet, 100 feet into your body. Just in that quiet field of tactile sensations. There's not a single thought in there. Those sensations of firmness, of moisture, of heat and cold, of tingling, vibration, whatever you felt, the sensations of the breath, not a single thought. They're quiet. Slip in there, and with every out-breath, just release and release and release. And just as if you've gone into the submarine and gone down. And it's quiet in there. Which enables you then, this is really a retreat. Retreating from the forefront of your mind where the firing is hot and heavy. And just retreat for a while. Go into a non-conceptual mode. Restore the equilibrium, the inner sense of calm and clarity. And then emerge back into the conceptual mode, and you'll probably be able to deal with whatever the upset was with a lot more clarity and efficiency. So that's one mode. That's the approach I like. It's called the chickening out mode. And that is, this is too much to handle, I'm retreating. It's like an old guerrilla aphorism, guerrilla aphorism that Mao Zedong coined. I believe he coined, at least he passed it on. And that he said, when the enemy advances, I retreat. When the enemy retreats, I advance. It's a very good strategy when your forces are much weaker than the forces you're trying to combat. So when they're full-scale assault, you just kind of back up and give them no target. When they're on the retreat, then you pick them off one by one. So in a similar fashion, when the mind is giving us a full assault and it's very powerful and it's really beating us up, well, one approach is just retreat. Live to fight another day. And say, hey, the mind's a real mess here. I'm getting out of there. I'm going to go into the body. Or like that phrase from a novelist, I think she lives up in the Bay Area. My mind is like a bad neighborhood. I try never to go there alone. One of my favorite. And so, say, hey, the mind's a mess. I'm slipping. This is a ghetto. This is a really tough neighborhood. I think I'm going to slip in, go into the body. At least it's quiet in there. So that's one approach. But this approach that we're looking into now, this practice of settling the mind in its natural state, this takes more skill, frankly. It's a subtler practice. Because it's not daydreaming. There is a big difference between this practice and daydreaming. Daydreaming, you don't need any training. You don't need to come to a one-day workshop for that. We know how to do that. When we're daydreaming, a thought, an image, a recollection comes up, a fantasy comes up. It comes up almost like a line with a hook and bait on it. It comes up, we go, and then it carries us off. And we're thinking about the past, the future, we're thinking on permutations of the present and so forth. We're carried there and then, called daydreaming. We're all very familiar with it. This practice on the surface looks a lot like daydreaming in the sense that we are allowing free association to arise. When this practice is being done correctly, there's no editing process. Whether it's X-rated or NR-17 or it's PG-rated, whatever is coming up, we don't edit, we don't censor, we don't change channels, we don't turn off the set. We don't say, oh no, I'm out of here, I'm going non-conceptual. So this takes guts. It takes some courage to actually be face to face with your own mind and all the stuff that's coming up without editing. When done correctly, even without preference. Which means as you allow the mind to go into, literally it is free association, so something that psychiatrists are very familiar with, for other people to do. Here we're allowing ourselves to do it and being our own monitor and observing whatever is coming up. But this isn't daydreaming. So how does it differ? In the daydreaming, a thought comes up, we're distracted by it, which means we're totally caught up in it, we grasp onto and identify with it, and we have a sense, I'm thinking about that. Or it's almost as if we slipped into a non-lucid dream. We get totally caught up in some memory, some fantasy, and so forth. And for the time being, if it's a strong thought, has some emotional charge to it, it becomes temporarily our reality. It is what we are attending to, we're caught up in it, and that is real for us, whether or not it has any basis in any kind of intersubjective reality. That's it for us right now. So it's very much caught up in, carried away by. Paul Ekman, my very dear friend, eminent psychologist, wrote a book he almost called In the Grip of Emotion. That was his preferred title, but the publisher didn't go for it. But I think he really captured the spirit of it. Sometimes strong emotions arise, and it's like they get us in their grip, like we've lost control. The mind is now under the sway, the domination of these emotions, sometimes thoughts, replicating thoughts, and so forth. So again, we can always hit submerge and just go down into the body where it's quiet. It can be quite a relief. Way to go to get a good night's sleep as well. This practice, though, does not slip down beneath them. It does not slip beneath the radar, beneath the horizon of the conceptual mode of mind, but actually goes right full force into the gale. But it's not daydreaming. And here's how it's not. And that is, as you're attending to the mind, just settling the mind in its natural state, observing quietly, non-reactively, the space of the mind and whatever arises within it, your mind hovers right in the here and now as continuously as possible, without wavering, without slipping into future thinking, so we're actually thinking about the future, without the mind slipping back into thinking about the past. The mind remains hovering without anything to hold on to, nothing to grip. Simply being aware of what the mind is dishing up, what thoughts, mental images, memories, and so forth are arising from moment to moment to moment. They may be past-oriented thoughts, future-oriented thoughts, present-oriented thoughts, images, and so forth, and the awareness is hovering right there in the present moment. Simply being aware of what arises and passes, arises and passes. So it's called, once again, bare attention. At least our best approximation of that. Now there's an image that I like a lot that I think captures the ambience of this quite closely, as an old bird watcher. And that is, there are various birds that do this. Marsh hawks do it, various accipiters do it. But the one I enjoy watching most do this is the kestrel, or when I was a kid they called it sparrowhawk. About the size of a pigeon, it's our smallest falcon in North America. Beautiful bird, beautiful markings, very delicate, very refined. It's got great contour, it looks like a little jet, like a fighter jet. Great lines. But it's a small falcon, and what the falcon will do is it will face into the wind. You can often see them doing this. It will face into the wind, and they'll do what is called kiting. Kiting. The falcon will face into the wind, so the wind is rippling over its head, over its torso, over its wings, of course, and it's just slightly moving its pin feathers, just slightly moving its tail, very small adjustments. But as it's doing so, even though the breeze here may be 10, 15, 20 miles an hour, the kestrel is remaining relatively stationary with respect to the ground. So So I'm sure you've seen this, at least in films. You've probably seen it in real life. It's quite a beauty to behold, frankly. And it shows, for the kestrel to do that, of course, the kestrel has to be very much here and now. It can't be thinking about the gust of breeze that went by 5 minutes ago, or the one that might come up in a few seconds. It's right there, and what it's doing, of course, is looking down for mice and crickets and so forth that it can have for lunch. So that's the point. But it's just easier to survey a certain body of land before if your point of reference is fairly still. So I like the image a lot, and it's the image I found that's the closest, at least in my experience, that in this practice we're kiting into the wind of the flow of thoughts, images, emotions, and so forth and so on, arising from moment to moment, and they don't do so homogeneously. They don't do so predictably, not when it's free association. Right. So you never quite know what's coming up, any more than that kestrel knows what the breeze is going to be like in 5 or 10 seconds, let alone 5 or 10 minutes. And so it's very attentive to the present moment, but you'll notice the kestrel did not grip tenaciously to some telephone line and do it that way by holding on really tightly, but in fact holding on to nothing at all, but just being very sensitive to the currents of the air right in the present moment. So in this practice, we're hovering right in the immediacy of the present moment, attentive to, but not swept away by, any of the thoughts, memories, emotions, and so forth that arise. Attending to them, and the very essence of this practice, as we'll see, as we read through just a one-page description of this practice, very traditional explanation, is we're attending to the space of the mind and its contents without distraction and without grasping. The whole practice is summarized in those two phrases. Without distraction, without grasping. Without distraction means we're not carried away by the thought. And that is, in this practice, you can ask, what is the referent of your attention? What are you actually attending to? So let's imagine an image of your mother arises. Okay, maybe some old memory of your mother. In my case, I remember my mother in the kitchen. So often when I come home from dinner, or from school or what have you, there she would be behind the counter, cleaning up or preparing a meal or a snack or whatever. We've all had images like that. So that image comes up, it's in my mind right now, and that image is immediately present, it's happening right now. The referent of that image, of her actually being in the kitchen when she was 35, 40 years old, that's ancient history. She's into her 80s by now. So the referent of the image is long gone. The image itself is utterly present. It's fresh. It's immediately right now. So in this practice, unlike daydreaming, where I'll go back and think about my mom and West Covina and snacks in the pool and weenie roast and whatever we did back then, going back to memory lane, instead of launching back there by way of distraction, I'm remaining right here. And so if memories of the barbecue come up, good. Memories are right there. The images are right there. They are present reality, and that's what I'm attending to. Without distraction, which means the referent is the immediate content of the mind, not the reference of the thoughts. Not the barbecue, not my mom when she was 40 years old, nothing in the past. The referent, the object of attention, is something taking place right now. Okay? That's not daydreaming. That's this practice. So it's without distraction. That's a pretty tall order right there, to allow thoughts, images, and so forth to rise and not be carried away by them. Right? But the without grasping is, if anything, an even greater challenge, a more subtle challenge. Without grasping means to be able to attend whatever is coming up without preference. So whether it's your mom making you a snack or whether it's a savage dog sinking its teeth into your leg, I'd all generally prefer the former rather than the latter, right? But as a mental image, the practice here is no preference. It's just a mental image. The dog's not going to hurt you. It's just a mental image. It has no more substance than a rainbow. So it's just a snarling dog. The sound of a dog snarling, its teeth, its muscles contracted and so forth. Whatever it is, very pleasant or unpleasant, whether it's virtuous or not virtuous, maybe it's compassionate, maybe it's hateful, what have you, whatever arises, long or short, coarse or subtle, pleasant or unpleasant, not grasping means we're just attending to it without reaction, without preference, just being present, without superimposing upon the contents of the mind the notion of mine or not mine, with as little conceptual projection as possible, just being present to what the mind is dishing up. But of course the mind is not some big agent. It is simply what is arising from moment to moment. So one way of characterizing this practice when it's being done relatively well, or exceptionally well, is the fusion, it's called the fusion of stillness and motion. The fusion of stillness and motion. The stillness is your awareness. Your awareness is like that kestrel, which is relatively still relative to the ground beneath. What's in motion? The wind currents flowing and flowing and flowing, sometimes buffeting, sometimes calm, sometimes stronger, weaker, and so forth. The air is constantly in motion. That's why it's called air. The kestrel is relatively stationary with respect to the ground. So in a similar fashion, as your awareness is buffeted by thoughts and images, emotions and imaginations, all kinds of stuff arising in the mind is in motion. The mind is active, churning out one thing after another, and your awareness is relatively still. So the stillness, the fusion of stillness and motion is the fusion, the simultaneity of the stillness of your awareness and the motion of the mind. And how the two can coexist, how you can be still and in motion at the same time. Of course, it's not you, it's awareness and thoughts. But how these two things can be taking place simultaneously. The stillness of awareness, the motion of the mind. There's a key to it. There's a trick. Not grasping. And that is when thoughts arise, thoughts, memories, fantasies, and so forth, when they arise and we grasp onto them, we identify with them, we're carried away by them, then we're in motion. We're zipping all over the place. The mind, our whole sense of our identity is moving here and there and there and there, and often with a lot of emotion coming up with it. So the mind gets into motion. We get into motion by grasping onto and identifying with the contents of the mind. But insofar as we can be so profoundly relaxed, at ease, loose, inwardly, in body and in mind, and the thoughts arise, memories and so forth, they arise, they come and go, and the awareness is just flowing. Relaxed, soft, still. A fusion of stillness and motion. So we can see there's a strong parallel between the quality of awareness that is very attentive. There's nothing zoned out or trance-like in this at all, just the opposite. Very present, very discerning, very attentive. If anything, exceptionally sharp and clear, nothing remotely like, amorphous or dull or vague, just the opposite all of that. But there's a strong parallel between this quality of awareness and a lucid dream. A lucid dream. And a lucid dream, of course, the very definition of that is you know that you're dreaming while you're dreaming. Well, if you really know that you're dreaming, perfectly clear that everything arising in the dreamscape has no more substance than a rainbow. It's just a mental image. Has no substance at all. It says there's nothing in the dream, anything appearing objectively to you, that can possibly do you any harm. It's like being attacked by a mirage, or attacked by a reflection in a mirror, or a rainbow. I mean, there's nothing in them that enables them to have any power to harm you at all. Mental images, mental events, these appearances in the dreamscape. There's nothing there, they're just appearances. No substance whatsoever, there's not a single molecule. Even if a great big Sherman tank is coming towards you and pointing its barrel right at your head, and they say, fire! What's going to come out of that muzzle? A dream image. No more substantial than the dreamed Sherman tank. It's just images all the way up and all the way down. So if you're very lucid and you see the Sherman tank muzzle point right in your face, you just open up, go ahead, shoot your dream bullet at me, your shell. The chances of it harming me are 0. But then if that's the case, why are we so often troubled by our dreams? Somebody just wrote me just recently about a dream. It was a recurrent dream and it was inspired by a very traumatic event in this person's life. So the dream itself, not only the traumatic event in the daytime, in the waking state when it took place years ago, but the dream was very troubling. The emotions just as real in a dream as they are in the waking state. All right? So it was a nightmare. It was a very troubling dream. Why should dreams ever trouble us? It's ridiculous. I mean, there's nothing there that can harm us. Why should we be afraid of or be averse to any kind of dream at all? They have no substance. And yet dreams, in a manner of speaking, certainly do trouble us. They can torture us. They can make it miserable to fall asleep. It sounds like they're very powerful. They can arouse such intense emotions of sadness, of grief, of fear, wake up trembling in the shakes. A friend of mine down in Mexico, his little baby daughter, a year and a half, going through a period, boy, she'll wake up like every night screaming her head off. Apparently that's not so uncommon for little babies, but boy, it's no fun for her. Adorable little girl. But boy, night after night after night, she'll just be screaming and she'll be waking up and she's trembling like she's seen the devil himself. Scared the bejabbers out of her. So a little infant, well, it happens into adulthood. What makes these dreams so powerful that they can terrify us, wake us up in a cold sweat, maybe ruin the whole day? I'm feeling really out of sorts today. I had such a terrible dream last night. What empowered those dreams? Our grasping onto them. Our reifying them, taking them to be real, imagining them to be imbued with a more substantial reality than they in fact have. When we imagine them to be so, when we take the dream state for physical reality, waking reality, then of course our emotions arise in a corresponding way. And the emotions again are as real in a dream as they are in the waking state. But why are all these troubling emotions arising? Why do we find some dreams so unpleasant? Because we don't understand their nature. And not only we don't understand, but we're getting their nature wrong. We're not lucid, we don't know that we're dreaming, therefore the dreams really trouble us. Well, those of you who had lucid dreams, you'll notice one of the most salient characteristics of a lucid dream is euphoria. Just the mere fact that you know that you're dreaming while you're dreaming gives a kind of a bliss. It comes right from the heart. It's kind of like, whew, it's so cool. And you don't need to see something really pleasant, experiencing something really enticing or delightful. Just being in the dream and knowing you're dreaming already gives rise to a sense of bliss, euphoria, a sense of freedom. A sense of freedom. Because the more lucid you are, the more you know, number one, that nothing can harm you in the dream, and number two, even if you feel like something could harm you from the dream, you can change it at will. You can just turn into Superman and fly away. Or if you don't feel like flying, you can turn this Sherman tank with its barrel pointed right at your head, just turn it into a flower with its stamen pointed at your head. Change it as you wish. It's just a dream. There's nothing there from the side of the Sherman tank that is actually metal, that has molecules in it. Change it as you wish. Turn it into a flower. Cocker spaniels are pretty high on my list of pretty innocent creatures. Never had a bad experience with a Cocker spaniel. And so there is this great degree of freedom insofar as you're lucid while you're dreaming in a similar fashion, very, very similar fashion, while in the waking state. And in the same arena where dreams take place. It's the same arena, the same domain of experience where these thoughts, memories, images, fantasies, and so forth, the same stage with a daytime cast and the nighttime cast. But neither one is any more substantial than another. Neither our thoughts during the daytime nor our dreams during the nighttime have any power from their own side by their own nature to inflict any harm on us at all. Having said that, people are sometimes driven to suicide by their thoughts, right? Sometimes maybe because of severe physical pain, illness, people will kill themselves. That happens. But I think more commonly, if people decide to actually take their lives, it's because their minds are giving them so much grief. Their thoughts, their memories, their emotions. That's very powerful. Enormously powerful. That thoughts can actually drive a person to want to end his life. And yet they don't have that power. Not in and of themselves. They get that power by our giving it to them. Through grasping onto and identifying with the thoughts. Grasping onto them, reifying them as something real, substantial. Then lo and behold, just like the contents, the people, the situations in the dream have then the power to make us miserable or make us joyful, likewise in the waking state, these thoughts can make us happy or make us miserable because we've given them the power to do that. So this practice of settling the mind in its natural state is basically taking back the power. Not a power trip, it's not a big egomaniacal thing here. But it's simply saying, these mental events, they don't have any power in and of themselves, so why should I pretend as if they do? And as I simply observe them from moment to moment without distraction and without grasping, without reifying them, without preferring them, without latching onto them as I or mind, but just being present with them, then we more and more clearly see experientially, not simply as a matter of belief, that the mind can't hurt us anymore. And the mind is not really necessary even to arouse us to a sense of pleasure or happiness, but in fact the mind that is settled in equipoise finds its happiness arising from a deeper dimension of awareness. So, this is quite a practice. In some traditions, in the Theravada tradition, for example, of Buddhism, Buddhism primarily formed, practice nowadays in Southeast Asia, this practice we're calling settling the mind in its natural state might very well be called a vipassana practice, insight practice, because it does tend to yield insights into the very nature of the mind, of mental events, emotions, thoughts, and so forth and so on. And so, since it can quite easily give rise to insights, it can be called insight meditation or vipassana. No problem there. So one may practice this method with the intention or the motivation to really to set out on an expedition into the nature of the mind, to get out of old ruts, get out of places where our feet have gotten stuck, and to look afresh as if for the first time. Observe thoughts, emotions, memories, and so forth arising, but in a fresh way, where we see them simply arising in the space of the mind, vanishing back into the space, but having no inherent identity or personhood of themselves, no substantial reality that can harm us or help us. It's quite a powerful technique. So, having said that, how was your first foray into this wilderness of your own mind? Any comments? Did you find it completely bewildering? Did you get carried away all the time? Did you have some experience of inexpressible bliss? In which case I won't ask you to say anything. Anything come up? Any questions or comments? Yes?
A question. So basically with this practice, there's maybe like a duality of consciousness, like sort of a pure aware. This is how they study pure awareness, like monks and whatnot, is because there's this pure kind of overriding consciousness in our mind, and that is trying to decipher the state that it naturally came from. So this would be the practice that most monks would use in order to empirically study the universe and the state of mind and psychology and all of that.
It is a common practice. I can't say most monks. Most monks don't meditate.
Really?
Yeah. Big shock. Certainly in the Buddhist tradition. I mean, I've lived in Sri Lanka, I've been to Southeast Asia many times, and I've lived with Tibetans for 14 years. In these traditional Buddhist cultures, being a monk for many is simply a profession, right? And so they tend to be, on the whole, monks and nuns, both genders. On the whole, in my experience, and it's now spanning 38 years, they tend to be quite ethical. I mean, there are exceptions, and that's very unfortunate. But on the whole, they don't kill, they don't rape, they don't steal, they don't do really nasty things. So that's kind of a common denominator you can pretty well count on. When you see a monk, they're probably pretty decent in terms of behavior. Some of them are very good scholars, they've studied a lot, many are not. Some are administrators, some are cooks, some are groundskeepers, some are looking after the young monks, more like kindergarten teachers. Some are doctors. One monk I know has spent the last 70 years of his life as a practitioner of Tibetan medicine, exceptionally good. And there are monks who are also yogis, and that is serious meditators. And there are yogis, many of whom are not monks. So I would regard myself as a contemplative, at least an aspiring one, but I haven't been a monk now for 21 years. But nevertheless, I've meditated now more since I stopped being a monk than I did before I was a monk. Okay?
I was just speaking about the monks that were using meditation as a way to
Yeah.
study you.
Yeah. Well, again, there are different monks, different traditions, different meditative practices. But within Tibetan Buddhism, this is commonly practiced. You'll find something similar in Zen and in the Vipassana tradition of Southeast Asian Buddhism, of observing the mind in this mode. So yes, it's quite a common practice. And in the next book that I have that will be published in February, a book called Mind in the Balance, I set forth this practice within a whole sequence of practices, meditative practices, in kind of a gradual progression or succession, and I parallel meditative tracks within Buddhism and in Christianity, going back to the Greek Orthodox, back to the early Desert Fathers, into the medieval Western European tradition, and lo and behold, the mindfulness of breathing is found in both. Yeah. And this practice that we in Buddhism call settling the mind in its natural state, I've seen it exactly depicted in the Christian tradition. Yeah. It's practiced in the Vedanta tradition. Vidya, who's right here, she could tell you a lot about that. It's called cultivating the witness, a witnessing mode of awareness. So, exactly what you're talking about. So this cuts across boundaries. That is, you don't have to believe in Ishvara or Brahman or believe in Buddha or believe in Jesus, otherwise you can't practice. This practice has been adopted with some subtle differences in different traditions. But yes, this is not a trivial practice, and it's quite a central practice for many serious contemplatives, East and West. For first of all, really understanding the nature of the mind. Okay, just how does this phenomenon occur? How do thoughts and so forth arrive? One carefully inspects how do thoughts, images and so forth, how do they emerge? Once they've emerged, how are they present? And how long are they present? And how then do they dissolve? So that moves more into an insight mode of inquiry, of really seeking out the nature of mental events. But in the midst of all the comings and goings of mental events, there's also something that is something like a constant, not instead of static, but an ongoing flow. And that's awareness. That's awareness. And so there are neuroscientists, there are psychologists and so forth, philosophers of mind, really trying to fathom the nature of awareness by studying its neural correlates, behavioral expressions, thinking philosophical thoughts about awareness. And all of that may have some advantage, but frankly, I think awareness is something, it's a natural phenomenon. And if one wants to understand awareness, the most straightforward and penetrating way to understand it is to observe it carefully. But for most of it, at least, the only person's awareness that we can observe directly is our own. And therefore we have to do something that on the face of it looks very non-scientific, very subjective, whereas science is so closely correlated to the notion of objectivity, which on the one hand means observe without bias, which is a really cool thing. Buddhists try to do that. But the objectivity in science also has a strong connotation of attend to, carefully observe, and therefore make real, phenomena that can be observed by multiple observers, the so-called third-person observer, right? So multiple surgeons will look at a brain and they will agree on what they're seeing, and they'll agree on the neural correlates with certain mental processes. But we don't have any third-person access to another person's thoughts, what's actually going on in their minds. So this is actually, I think, the most scientific way and most profoundly contemplative way to fathom the nature of the mind, the nature of consciousness, for starters, because that's exactly where you're looking, the very nature of the space of the mind. How big is this space? It is a domain of experience, isn't it? That you don't see with the eyes, you don't hear with the ears, it's a domain. How big is it? You know, the space of the mind. Is it located someplace? Is it between the ears? Is it in the body, outside the body? Or none of the above? And so to explore the space of the mind, explore its contents, explore by direct observation, immediate experience, the very nature of awareness of all of these phenomena. And then, as one does so, then this is bound to lead to insight into the relationship between the mind and the objects of the mind. Because there's not only thoughts that are arising as objects of awareness, but there's also your visual form, the visual form of this room, the sound of voices and so forth. So this is a kind of natural science from the inside out. Okay? It starts from the ground zero, from the very point of where are we? The mind itself is the common denominator of all of our observations. We're always observing whatever we observe with the mind, right? We start there with the science of the mind and then extend outwards from there. Whereas modern science, going back to Galileo, quite interestingly, has started, if we start with Galileo, which I think, or Copernicus if you like, what was the focus of their attention, especially if we go back to Copernicus, the beginning of the Copernican revolution, looking at that which is the most distant from the mind, the most distant from us, right? Stars, planets, sun and moon. Doesn't get any further than that. They would start there, and then after 300 years they got to the mind. From the time of Copernicus, it took him 300 years to start a science of the mind. So that was rather an incremental approach. And then it was a good century after that, only about 10, 15 years ago, that scientists finally came to the conclusion that it might be legitimate to actually take consciousness itself as a subject of inquiry. But of course, the whole strength of the scientific tradition for the last 400 years is looking outwards. But when you look outward, you don't see consciousness in anything. At most, you'll see neural correlates, but they don't still know what the neural correlates of consciousness are. So these are complementary approaches to understanding the natural world. From the outside in, finally coming to the mind, or from the inside out, eventually coming to the stars and planets. Okay? Good. Yes?
Would that outside influence then include the field, as in Rupert Sheldrake's sense, the morphogenetic field? Would that be an outer or an inner place?
I think Rupert Sheldrake, along with a lot of other sympathizers of his thought, of his very interesting speculations, is waiting for some clear empirical evidence of the morphogenic fields. They may exist, they may not. On the same theme, that doesn't mean it's flaky, it just means that there's no really compelling evidence that biologists are jumping onto the bandwagon and say, yay, morphogenic fields. But in a similar fashion, string theory, M theory, superstring theory in modern physics. I mean, it's incredibly elegant. 11 dimensions, I mean, it's the most sophisticated mathematical theory of the physical universe ever devised by humanity, and there's no empirical evidence for it at all, okay? So all these higher dimensions. And so it may be true, but there's no empirical evidence yet. But if we go to, without focusing on a particular theory that may or may not prove to be true, where this does lead to is a challenging of the very demarcation or the barrier between outer and inner, right? So if there are morphogenic fields, then this is clearly something that is on the one hand subjective. We are after all, living organisms, so we're part of that field. At the same time, it's not confined within our bodies, it's something broader, more intersubjective, more in a broader space. And so if they do exist, that would be a mode of reality that's breaking down the barrier between absolute objectivity and absolute subjectivity. But now that's already built into the technique here in a very, I think, quite ingenious way, very simple way. And so I'll mention it right now. If we had a lot of questions coming out, it would be bound to come up. And here's the question that hasn't been posed yet. And that is, I find it rather distracting to do this practice with my eyes open. Is that really necessary? I'd rather keep the eyes closed so I can watch my mind without distraction. How's that for a question? Okay. So, close the doors. I'm in the movie theater of my mind now. So I'm not being bothered, distracted by visual thoughts or visual images. I'm not interested in them right now. Auditory, well, I want to be in a really quiet space. But I'm going to close my eyes. And oh yeah, there are the images coming up. Oh yeah. So I'm in the movie theater of my mind. And it's almost as if the screen on which images are being projected is the inside of my eyelids, right? Which then implies that the space of the mind is behind the eyelids and probably in front of the back of the head. In other words, the space of my mind is about as big as a football, okay? And doing that, actually reinforces a completely uncorroborated, and I'm persuaded, totally false hypothesis. And that is that the space of the mind, that thoughts themselves, mental images, memories, emotions, are actually located in the physical space of the brain. Now there's actually no evidence for that at all. There's very good evidence that for emotions, thoughts, and so forth, that there are very specific neural correlates taking place inside the brain that are closely related to, often in a causal fashion, with mental events. Fair enough, that's good brain science, good neuroscience, to find the neural correlates of specific emotions, anxiety, thoughts, and so forth and so on. Very good. It's good science. The neural correlates inside the brain, and then there's the mental event. But simply because the neural event and the mental event are correlated does not mean they have to be both located in the same place. That's simply a metaphysical leap of faith, and it's one I'm not willing to make for a very simple reason. No evidence. No evidence at all. All right? And so I don't want to reinforce a notion that's now just saturating the media, saturating modern education. It's everywhere. Where people, when I was teaching school teachers, when I was teaching cultivating emotional balance in the scientific study, the school teachers, none of them were brain scientists. You know, they read the media, they're just educated people. These school teachers were interchangeably using the word mind and brain. You know? And I thought, well, you know, the results are not in yet. We do not know at this point whether the mind and brain are equivalent. We do not know the relationship of them. And there's some very interesting anomalies out there that suggest they're not equivalent at all. But it's an open question, at least that. This is a good scientific conclusion right now. At this point, we don't know the relationship between mind and brain. So to kind of, how do you say, in a kind of a slap-happy way, just leap to the conclusion, well, the mind, the brain, they're the same thing. I find that totally unscientific. Just radically unscientific. It's drawing a conclusion before the evidence is there. That's what religious fundamentalists do. They'll draw ironclad conclusions without any supporting empirical evidence or even rational argument. And that's what I find a lot of neuroscientists do. You know, which is kind of embarrassing because, you know, they should be good scientists, and as scientists they are, but as metaphysicians they often suck. because they're not trained in it, which means they do it badly. So why have the eyes open? We're at least not reinforcing an uncorroborated assumption that many of us hold, that the space, that my mind, my thoughts are actually occurring someplace between my ears, behind my eyeballs, in front of the back of my head. The thoughts are actually in there. You do a brain scan, you won't see any thoughts. You won't see any mental images. You'll see brain, lots of brain stuff happening. You won't see any thoughts. And those very complex brain happenings are definitely, some of them, correlated with thoughts, but the nature of the thoughts, the location of thoughts, is completely an open question at this point. So we don't close the eyes, in part, not to reinforce the notion that the mind is a very small space, and it's located behind my eyeballs, and now I can see it more clearly. Right? So the eyes are open. The eyes are open. And then with the eyes open but vacant, then we attend to whatever thoughts, images, and so forth should arise. And they may very well arise clearly outside the body. Now this is not some mystical insight, it's not some ESP or something like that. It's not a paranormal event, it's an absolutely commonplace event. It happens all the time. It's been happening for millennia. And I can demonstrate. It's time for Mickey Mouse. It used to be Donald Duck. No, it used to be Bugs Bunny. But I teach a lot internationally, and not everybody in the world knows who Bugs Bunny is. Actually, for some people, you say that, and it just sounds like a rodent with fleas. But I haven't yet met anybody who doesn't know what Mickey Mouse looks like. So that's become my international icon, because it seems to be now embedded in the modern psyche. Even my wife, who was raised in Croatia in the 1950s, she watched Mickey Mouse in Croatia, okay, Yugoslavia. So we all know what Mickey Mouse is. Speak now or forever hold your peace. If you don't know what Mickey Mouse looks like, I'm going to have to find another icon. Mickey Mouse, we know what Mickey Mouse looks like. So imagine, what does Mickey Mouse look like? Visualize Mickey Mouse about hand-sized, rodent size, on top of my head. That's my little crown jewel, Mickey Mouse. Big ears, big happy smile, pink nose. All right. There's Mickey Mouse. You tracking? Okay. So some of you got probably pretty a clear image. People are artists, people are contractors, architects. People work a lot with mental visual imagery, tend to be very good at this. And some people, Mickey Mouse, they generally know what it looks like and can't visualize it at all, and most of us fall someplace in between. But Mickey Mouse on top of my head. You've got him, you've placed him within your visual field, because the appearance of my head is in your visual field, and you place Mickey Mouse right on the crown of my head. Now where was that Mickey Mouse located? If anybody had a camera here and took a picture of my, there are a few cameras here, I'll bet you on both of the video cameras, there will be no videograph of Mickey Mouse. You might want to check the film. It would really surprise me if Mickey Mouse shows up. Then I'll have to change my whole presentation. But I'm going to assume, until shown otherwise, that no Mickey Mouse was photographed, because there are no photons here emitting photons of a certain frequency corresponding to the colors of Mickey Mouse, whereas for my hair color, facial complexion, and so forth, yes. The Mickey Mouse was appearing with greater or lesser clarity, depending upon your own abilities. And where? Just above my head. And where is that? Not in physical space. Because any brain scientist, physicist will tell you the brain does not have the capacity to project an image through physical space and actually materialize something on top of my head. No can do. That's not happening. So this image of Mickey Mouse above my head was appearing. It did exist. It could even make you smile. If little Mickey Mouse starts doing a little jig, might start making you chuckle. Okay? So appearances, just like appearances in a dream, can make you chuckle, make you fearful. They're just images, no more substantial than the Mickey Mouse you visualized on top of my head. So it does have causal efficacy. It can trigger emotions, trigger thoughts. Where's Minnie? Mickey looks so lonely. Where's Minnie Mouse? And where's Goofy? And so forth. You might want to bring in the whole entourage. But where is Mickey Mouse appearing? In the space of your mind. In the space of your mind, and your space of your mind right now, depending on where you're located in this auditorium, is at least 15 feet away from the top from your head. So the space of the mind, when we view it in this way, and people bear in mind, this is not only visualizing Mickey Mouse above somebody's head 15 or 30 feet away, but it's looking up at the moon. Now when Tibetans look up at the moon, they see an image of a rabbit. And so one epithet of the moon is the rabbit bearer, because they see a bunny rabbit up there. Of course, we see a face, a man in the moon. People look at patterns of stars and constellations or galaxies and what have you and see a bear, a scorpion, twins, a ram, and so forth. They're seeing them up there. You see, oh, can you see the bear? See, that's where his head is, and so forth and so on. They're seeing them. This has been going on for millennia, and where are those images of the bear, the scorpion, and so forth arising? In the space of people's minds, which is now located out there in deep space. Except for, of course, the mind is not really projecting something a million light years away. It's projecting it right in the space of the mind, which is not any distance away at all. So this is not designed, these comments here have not been designed to bring forth some metaphysical belief in you, but rather to challenge notions of the space of the mind as being small and localized between the ears or something like that. Okay? Opens it up. Yes?
I just had a question about
When you're meditating,
Go right after. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, please.
when you're meditating and a thought rises, a thought dissolves,
Yes.
there seems to me, I'm not sure, is it when another one doesn't arise for a while, it's almost like there's this lucid dream where I bounce off of it, like or wake up, or there's a dream from wherever I'm aware.
Yeah.
Is the bounce just part of the problem, or is there a point where you don't have another thought arising and you're thinking you're supposed to have that? I don't know how to put it in words.
Yeah, I'll try to respond, and if my words don't quite strike the target, then you let me know, okay? Yeah. There's a parallel between the practice we did this morning and the one in the afternoon. There are a number of parallels. Here's one. Relinquishment of control. Now, the breathing is something that, within parameters, we can clearly control. You can right now breathe really shallowly, if you like, or take a big deep breath, or hold your breath, or expel your breath and then keep it out for a little while. You can do all kinds of things with the breath, right? But when you're practicing the shamatha method for training attention of mindfulness of breathing, even though you can certainly control the breath, modify it, regulate it, try to have it fit some preconceived notion of what good breathing is like, you don't do it. You just keep your intelligence to yourself. Keep your ability to control to yourself. And it's basically based on trust. I think it's very well-founded trust. That if you allow the body to breathe without intervention, the body without intervention of will, intellect, memory, and so forth, the body knows better how to breathe than we do. And my hypothesis, that I haven't seen it disproven yet, so I'm going to keep on having it as a working hypothesis, my belief is that one reason that sleep, a good night's sleep, is so restorative. We feel so fresh when we wake up in the morning, while we might feel really wasted 8 hours earlier. My hypothesis is that one factor of that, one important factor, that enables us to feel so fresh the next morning is the breathing that takes place while in deep sleep. That it's just, we're out of the way and it flows, it balances. It's like there's a whole, it's like putting the body into a tune-up shop, like having it serviced every time we fall asleep and wake up and say, hey, I don't feel wasted anymore, I don't feel tired and groggy and so forth. And so we could control the breath, modify it, and we don't. Okay? In a similar fashion, if I ask you, think right now about a certain fairy tale and think of the whole line of the story and how it came out, you could do that. No question. You can control your thoughts to some extent. If I said, think of a whole bunch of different types of fruit, no problem. So to a certain, within parameters, you have a lot of control over your mind. Right? Here in this practice, while you could exert control over the contents of the mind, you don't. You don't prefer. You don't have a sense, oh, I should be having a thought now. Who said? That wasn't part of the practice. And who said you're supposed to have a thought? Who said you're not supposed to have a thought? Who said anything? This practice is one in which I have very deep trust. And the basis of my trust is not my great reverence, which I do indeed have great reverence and respect for my teachers, for the Dalai Lama, for many names you would not know, Gyatro Rinpoche, Geshe Rabten, many, many other teachers. I do have trust in them. But my trust in this practice is not so much contingent upon them or the Buddhist tradition or centuries of Tibetan yogis. It's more a trust in the innate healing capacity, the restorative capacity, the balancing capacity of the mind itself. Now, it's not based on blind faith. I've spent multiple retreats, some of them 6 months long, just doing this for 8 or 10 hours a day. And then you find out for yourself that when you allow the mind to just flow unimpededly, but without reinforcing habitual neurotic patterns of rumination, grinding the teeth, getting caught up in fantasies, desires, aversions, fears, and so forth, but just allow whatever comes up to arise and arise and arise without intervention, without regulation, without reactivity, simply being present with it. This is, on the one hand, this practice, as mentioned earlier, is a very, very powerful practice for exploring the mind. Because there you are, you're really being objective. And you had mentioned there seems to be almost like an objectivity, almost like a split between awareness and the contents of the mind. That's true. That we're actually observing the mind rather objectively. Now, this is not an ultimate practice, this is not the ultimate destination of meditative practice, but it is a way to really observe clearly and distinctively the kind of events that are arising in the mind. So on the one hand, it's epistemic. This is a practice for the pursuit of knowledge, understanding, insight. But it's got a double whammy here. It has two facets to it. On the one hand, this really is a path of insight. It is a path for stabilizing the mind, refining greater ease, stability, clarity of attention. But there's something else to it. And that is, in doing this practice, we're actually observing the mind heal itself. That's really quite a wonder to behold. That the mind is not just a tabula rasa, some blank slate in which we throw our emotions and memories and thoughts and so forth, any more than the body is a tabula rasa that just kind of sits there as a big chunk of flesh and bone. And we know that. It's a commonplace, but the miracle of it is really grown stale. The fact that we can cut ourselves, I mean, just cut the flesh right open. And then if you just sat there and watched it and kept it clean, if you could watch it and had a lot of patience, then you would see that wound actually healing and covering right over and healing itself completely. That's really quite amazing. Or if you break a bone and then you just set it and then just don't jostle it, just set it correctly. Then if you had X-ray vision, you could just watch that bone actually grow together again. And in so many other ways, more subtle, warding off viruses, bacteria, infections of one sort or another. The body is a very dynamic, it's almost like an instrument designed to heal itself. And within limits, of course, it really does. It's amazing what it can do. So we know this about the body. We know there's not a plastic surgeon on a planet who can actually heal a simple abrasion, a simple cut. Not one. They can cover it over, they can slap stuff on it, but get it to heal? There's no surgeon who can do that. There's not a surgeon in the bone that can make two bones grow together. Doesn't matter how much they're paid, they can't make two bones grow together. But they can set it properly so this wondrous event of self-healing, natural healing takes place. So we know that. Pardon me for wasting so much time telling you things you know already. But something that's not so obvious, I think, especially in our how-to, let's get out there and fix it kind of mentality that is so common in the modern era, the capacity to which the mind is able to heal itself. And this practice, we are enabling it to do so. We're allowing for the condition for it to do so. Now, having said that, why, if the mind can heal itself, why are we not already just radiantly healthy and all of us just living one joyful day after another with no problems? Well, it's because we get in the way. Just as if you have a wound, a simple paper cut doesn't get much simpler than that. Just superficial wound. Just let it get dirty. Let it get good and infected. You know, muck it about in some really grotty, dirty kind of environment. And get infected, and then just go for it. And that paper cut can turn into gangrene. That can start chewing up your arm, get to your torso and your heart, and you're dead, right? And so what should have just healed by itself, if we'd just done the sensible thing, and that is keep it clean, and then lo and behold, it's history within a week. That same little paper cut, when infected, can kill us, or maybe cause for amputation of a whole limb. Remember, the Civil War wasn't that long ago. And the primary remedy for people having serious wounds is just cut off the part that was hurt, right? It wasn't that long ago. And so, as we can ask, what is it that we do to the body that prevents it from getting healed? You break a bone and you don't set it. Well, it will never heal. Those bones will never grow together again. And if they do, then it'll be mangled, right? What is it what we're already doing that prevents the body from healing? And now, already getting to the point of this practice, what are we already doing that prevents the mind from healing? And it's really locked into these two phrases. And that is, attend to whatever arises within the space of the mind and its contents, without distraction, without grasping. So when we get caught up in distraction, we can simply reinforce the same neuroses, the same imbalances, the same emotional turmoil. And likewise, very importantly, without grasping, without reifying, without grasping onto, identifying with. In that, then, we can have one trauma, an unpleasant event. Somebody springs to mind, whenever I think of this, somebody springs to mind who had a terrible experience with his father when he was 13 years old. The father did something, it was not physically brutal, it was psychologically just devastating. The father didn't do it to me mean, he just didn't know better. It's somebody I know, it's not me. But it took a long, this is a long time ago, this is decades ago. But the pain for the youngster, the 13-year-old boy, was so intense, what his father had unintentionally done to him, but it was extremely callous, the words that were spoken, that 50, 60, 70 years after the event, this person would recount what happened at the age of 13, still bring tears to the eyes. The event probably took 5 minutes. The whole, from start to finish, 5 minutes. Torture this person for decades afterwards, on many occasions. That didn't heal. That didn't heal at all. Time doesn't heal all wounds at all. It just makes them old, right? And yet wounds do sometimes heal. How can we be proactive here? How can we help the mind heal itself so that traumas we've experienced, miseries, points of fear, suffering, and so forth, that when we recall them, they no longer reinforce the misery. It's this practice. It's not a panacea, but it's pretty darn good. That we actually observe the mind healing itself. And metaphor given in the Tibetan tradition is watching snakes that have tied themselves into a knot. Just allow them to be, give them a large enough space that they can uncoil, and the knots come loosened and the snakes then are free. The mind ties itself into knots. It coagulates around. It clenches upon memories, fantasies, thoughts, emotions, and so forth. Gets in the grip. And it tights, it almost like in kind of a rigor mortis, it gets just locked in, tight, frozen. It doesn't heal. And the way to enable the mind to then manifest its healing capacity is to allow the thoughts, the memories, the emotions to arise and be totally present with them. And to use this wonderful phrase, go back to the etymology of attention. Whatever's coming up, pleasant, unpleasant, traumatic, sanguine, whatever it is. Just let it be and attend to it in the mode of watching over, attending to, looking after, and caring for. So it's quite powerful. But the confidence in the practice then comes not from any eloquence on my part or the extraordinary qualities of my teacher or the noble Buddhist tradition. The confidence comes from actually seeing it from your own experience. And the confidence, the faith, the trust comes in more and more in the healing capacity of your own awareness. Say, wow, I never knew I had that ability, that was within me. And here's a way to allow that to manifest. So that's the power of this practice. So it's epistemic, really is a path of insight, can yield insights, understanding, knowledge about the nature of the mind, and the relationship of mind and the universe, but it also, in the same breath, in the same practice, one simple practice, you're actually watching the mind heal. Now, I'll say this and then we'll take a break. We say settling the mind in its natural state. It's a process. It's not something you simply do and then you say, I did it. It's a process, an ongoing process of settling, which means our awareness getting more and more unentangled, loose, free, in the midst of this, all the stuff that comes up. But not entangled, not caught up in, but simply present with this discerning, attentive mindfulness. Then gradually over the course of this practice, especially if one takes out some time just to do this really seriously for a sustained period, like in the 2-3 month retreats that I led last year. We had some people doing this for 8 hours a day for 3 months. They learned a lot of things. And I would say, if not in all cases, perhaps in all cases, certainly in most cases, people actually observe their minds heal in some very, very tangible ways. They knew it for themselves, right? So the mind settles in its natural state, and over the course of time, as you've already experienced, sometimes there are lapses. You're attending very closely, you're observing closely, and on occasion you're just looking into an empty field. I think you mentioned that, like, you may feel I should be thinking something, but that, you don't even need to think that. Simply, then you just turn that into grist for the mill. A thought just came up, it said, I probably should be thinking something. But you simply attend without reactivity. And then over the course of time, if you imagine this is kind of like time-lapse photography, then you would see gradually the sheer congestion, the sheer volume of mental events, thoughts and images and so forth, gradually dissipating. Longer and longer, more frequent lapses, where as closely as you attend, you're looking into an empty, luminous space, but with no distinct content. And then as you keep on settling in, the sheer volume gradually, by its own accord, without your suppressing it or even preferring for the mind to be quieter, the volume of the mind, the contents of the mind, subside, subside, subside. So it's mostly quiet, and then you'll find a little ripple. But without the perturbation. It's mostly like a pond, but with hardly any ripples on it. Mostly just quiet. The metaphor is like an ocean unmoved by waves. And you continue. Interesting thing here, it's not boring. It's not boring. It's not boring at all. Why is that? Not much is happening. And when there's a lot happening, that can arouse your interest a lot. At least it can trouble you. But when things have really calmed down, you might think, well, now it's just getting to be like a trance. It must be boring. And it's not. Because what's directly correlated to boredom is absence of clarity of attention. I think it's a strong, almost like a mathematical rule. You can be observing something that has really hardly any interest content from its own side at all. Like the sensations of the breath. You've seen one, you've seen them all. Right? I mean, they don't vary a whole lot. And yet if you bring clarity to your practice of mindfulness of breathing, you may practice for 8 or 12 hours a day and not get bored. This is true. It happens. It's not a hypothesis. It's not that the sensations of the breath get more interesting, it's the quality of awareness you're bringing to it is so clear that anything is interesting. Because it's so brightly illuminated. It doesn't get boring. Well, similarly here, you're tending to the space of the mind and less content that arouses interest, that is intriguing or troubling or what have you. And yet the vividness, as that has been cultivated synergistically with relaxation and stability, the clarity getting sharper and sharper, clearer and clearer. Now, I've been in correspondence on a regular basis with some of the people who went through one of the 3-month retreats that I led last year as a part of a very large scientific study called the Shamatha Project. Some people, about 1 out of 5, out of the 70 people, have continued. They just figured 3 months was great. Let's see about, a lot more. Let's push the envelope. See where this really goes. So I spoke with someone just a couple of days ago. Very sincere, very good practitioner. Meditating now in 3 to 4 hour sessions. Hardly any physical discomfort. The mind, natural state is blissful. Mind is radiantly clear. This is all reporting directly from her experience. And I'm very happy to share this anonymously. I would never invade her privacy, but you wouldn't know who this is. It's a person. I happen to be a woman. Finding that the degree of clarity, of luminosity, of awareness is now saturating in between sessions. Just ordinary waking life. Much clearer. Dreams clearer. And then she reported this in the last report she gave me just a couple of days ago. She is really quite far advanced. She has not achieved shamatha yet, but she's doing very well in the practice. She said, now, what I told her would be happening, lo and behold it is, she says, now I'm experiencing the senses starting to implode. That is, even with the eyes open, the visual field growing dim. The auditory field, with the ears wide open, no earplugs, imploding. She said the last one to go, the smell and taste are fairly minor in this regard. The last one to go, she said, is the body. The experienced sense of the body, the tactile sensations, but that's starting to implode as well. Now it sounds on the surface of it as if she's falling asleep. Because that's exactly what happens when you fall asleep, right? Even if your eyes are open, you don't see, you don't hear, you don't feel the body in the bed, you're imploding, you're going into purely mental domain. But normally when we fall asleep, the trajectory of going from the waking state to the dream state is one of losing clarity. So when you finally fall into non-REM sleep, dreamless sleep, you don't know what it's like. You don't know how long you were asleep. Now I was at a retreat just recently, another retreat, where another student of mine who also went through the 3-month retreat, he reported, so this is a guy, that gives you a big clue, he's one of that 3.3 billion people. He reported, since he actually has quite a knack for lucid dreaming, he was in the midst of a dream, it became lucid, and he decided, I want to practice shamatha in my dream. He did. Very rapidly, the whole dream vanished. His mind slipped right then into dreamless sleep. He continued to be lucid for 3 or 4 hours in an ongoing stream of bliss. He was lucidly in dreamless sleep, experiencing that dimension of consciousness. All right? And so there is a strong parallel here between falling asleep and settling the mind in its natural state. Both of these are leading to a state of consciousness called in Buddhism substrate consciousness, which is devoid of content, has no gender, it has no species specification, that is, it's not specifically human or rodent or bovine. It's just a luminous, spacious, blissful, clear, conceptually silent state of awareness. And it's not ultimate. It's not God, Atman, Brahman, Nirvana. We're not giving any big exalted name to it. It's just a substrate consciousness, right? But that's the mind settled in its natural state. That all that is unique about your particular psyche, a woman's psyche, relatively young, American, all of that with your own unique personal history, all of that has its place, and all of that is unique about your psyche, your thought patterns, emotions, and so forth, that's embedded in this domain of the mind called the psyche. It's what psychologists study. But in this practice, you allow, emphasis on that, you allow your psyche to dissolve. Dissolve into the substrate consciousness, which is just luminous, blissful, spacious, quiet. Right? No personal history there, at least nothing manifest. And it's that point that your mind has settled into its natural state. And you make one of the most important discoveries that I think human beings have ever made, and I'm very happy to report some of my students have now made this discovery. Another one that I spoke with, a man just recently, also in retreat, also done the 3-month retreat. He is now discovering for himself that the natural state of his own mind is blissful. The natural state of his own mind, when it's not being aroused with some stimulus, a pleasant stimulus, an unpleasant stimulus, it's not being aroused by any object. The mind is now loose, it's disengaged, it's no longer grasping onto and reifying. The mind has settled. And he's been doing this practice now for some thousands of hours, the practice we just did. He's finding out through his own experience, and he said, this is such an enormous, he's a very bright guy, very well educated. He can go off and make $1 million, I think, in a couple of years if he puts his mind to it. Very, very sharp businessman. But he decided to do this for a while, just spend 10 hours a day meditating. And he's finding one of the greatest discoveries is that your mind, when you settle in its natural state, with no arousal by pleasant stimuli, the mind simply coming to a state of equilibrium, resting in its own natural state. Bliss is one of its innate characteristics. And it's not bliss you get from anybody else. It's not from a teacher, a tradition, a belief system, not from God, not from Jesus. I mean, I don't see any reason to bring them in, and that's no disparagement of God or Jesus. It's just that that's not what this is about. It's just the natural state of your own awareness. When it's not convoluted, not configured, not wrapped up, fixated, tied up, and it's loose, settled. I think it's quite important. It casts the whole advertising industry in a whole new light. Because this is something you can't buy. I mean, really, this method you can learn in one afternoon. And I'll tell you this, then we'll take our break. This, unlike the mindfulness of breathing, I didn't unpack that fully. If you should spend 8 hours a day for months on end practicing mindfulness of breathing, the actual method will change somewhat. Changes somewhat. Right? No reason to go into that more elaborately right now. This practice, it doesn't change at all. The method stays exactly the same. Right? But the end point, when you've settled the mind in its natural state, and don't hold your breath for this, don't hold your breath for anything, as a matter of fact, is that your mind settles in its natural state. It gradually, naturally becomes calmer and calmer as it gets untangled, disentangled. Emotions coming up, seeing them clearly, they dissolve. Memories come up, they arise clearly, they dissolve. Because we're not grasping onto and reinforcing the neurotic responses to them. Your psyche dissolves in the substrate, your physical senses implode, and you enter into a state that is remarkably similar to deep sleep, but with the caveat that you are extraordinarily awake. Not just normal awake, extraordinarily awake, with like a 1,000-watt bulb, illuminating the empty space of your own awareness. And that is not nirvana, that's not Buddha nature, that's not any of these exalted states of consciousness that are referred to in Buddhism, but it's a very good platform for then really investigating the nature of mind. Because as I heard Vidya say, you've now achieved deep sanity. And you might want to use it and not just enjoy it. Okay? On that note, let's take a break and come back at 4:15. We'll go right back to the practice, have a bit more time for discussion. What I'd like to do now briefly, I could spend a lot of time on this one passage, but I won't. But in my readings, fairly extensive readings from the Tibetan, pertaining to this practice we've ventured into this afternoon, here's one very synthetic, very concise, short, to-the-point presentation of this method. It's come from the late 19th century, and in a way it really doesn't matter. It could be from the late 9th century or the mid-20th century. These teachings are actually quite timeless. Some teachings in Buddhism are very much embedded in time and place. You can see cultural influences, just like with art. You say, oh, this is 17th century Eastern Tibet and so forth. And then some, like geometric forms, it doesn't really matter whether your triangle was done 3 centuries ago or 3 millennia ago. There are some things in geometry that kind of transcend time and space. And similarly, there's some meditative practices that I think are just rather timeless. And this is one of them. It's really quite core. So as many of you know who have attended earlier retreats or teachings from me, my predilection is to seek out elements within the Buddhist tradition, the one I'm most familiar with, that are very central, that are really core to the tradition itself, that no one would think of as marginal or peripheral, and at the same time are very universal. This is exactly one such practice. Very central, very important, both for understanding the mind as well as healing the mind, and yet totally non-sectarian. You find it in Vedanta, you find it in Christianity, Theravada Buddhism, Zen Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism. Here's one presentation from the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, which I will just read through with just a few comments, but it kind of passes on a transmission that may be useful. This is from quite a great adept, a Tibetan adept, of what's called the Dzogchen, or the Great Perfection tradition of Tibet in the 19th century, still very vibrant today. His commentary on an earlier text called The Heart Essence of Vimalamitra, who himself, Vimalamitra, was a great adept from the 8th century. So you just see he skipped 1100 years there, and it didn't matter. What's a millennium among friends? And so the practice is really quite timeless, and here it is. You'll notice that it really has no cultural trappings, no Asian or most Occidental trappings. It's just what it is. Let your gaze be vacant, which means your eyes open, your gaze vacant, with your body and mind inwardly relaxed. Every phrase here is very important. There's no fluff. With your body and mind inwardly relaxed and without allowing the continuum of your consciousness to fade from a state of limpidity. Limpidity means transparency, luminosity, implying that the continuum of consciousness is naturally limpid, naturally luminous, clear, transparent, without allowing it to fade from a state of limpidity and vivid clarity. Sustain it naturally and radiantly. In other words, you're not adding on anything to consciousness. You're not configuring it in some way corresponding to some religious or contemplative tradition. You're letting it be and manifest its own innate qualities of limpidity and clarity. Do not clutter your mind with many critical judgments. Thinking, am I doing it right? Maybe I'm not doing it right. I should be having more thoughts. I should be having few thoughts. Oh, I shouldn't be having thoughts like that at all. This is terrible. I should stop. Cool it with all of that. Whatever thoughts arise, just let them be grist for the mill. Do not clutter your mind with many critical judgments. Do not take a short-sighted view of meditation, evaluating how the meditative practice is going from minute to minute or session to session. Take a bigger view, as if you're changing your diet. Changing your diet. You may not expect to see any dramatic changes in one day or even 1 week, but over the course of weeks and months, you might see a very significant change. He said, avoid great hopes and fears that your meditation will turn out one way and not another. So just let it be. With as little anxiety, hopes and fears as possible. At the beginning, have many daily sessions, each of them of brief duration, and focus well in each one. So this, I think, is very, very wise counsel, and that is, however much time you have to practice each day, whether it's a half an hour or whether it's hours a day, general theme at the beginning, when you're still relatively a novice, is to keep your sessions short and value quality over quantity. In other words, don't start creating bad habits of sloppiness in meditation, thinking that it's all well worthwhile because you're meditating for such long periods. This woman that I mentioned who's meditating for 3 to 4 hours per session, she's crystal clear the whole time. She said only the tiniest bit of laxity and excitation arise at all, in a 3 or 4 hour period. Right? So then 3 or 4 hours is fine. But when you start 20 minutes, 24 minutes, 25 minutes, that's probably pretty good. Whenever you meditate, bear in mind the phrase without distraction and without grasping, and put this into practice. That is the very essence of this practice, resting your awareness, attending to the space of the mind and its contents, without being carried away by distraction, without latching on with grasping, letting be, letting be. As you gradually familiarize yourself with the meditation, increase the duration of your sessions. So what you do then is increase the duration and possibly decrease the number of sessions. All happens very organically, very naturally, not by some strict predetermined regimen. If dullness sets in, so you're noting this with introspection, if dullness sets in, then the antidote is arouse your awareness. Take a fresh interest. If there is excessive scattering and excitation, you note that with introspection, then the antidote is loosen up. So just exactly what might be counterintuitive. Often when our minds are very distracted, get really agitated, then we may feel, oh, I got to clamp down here. I got to focus more intently, and we grip more. Okay, mind, shape up. I'm in charge here, and we clamp down and try to focus really intently, and that's good for a very short period, and then it's exhausting. So this practice is just the opposite. The mind's very turbulent, scattered, and so forth. Good, loosen up. Release the grasping on all the turbulence of the mind. Determine in terms of your own experience the optimal degree of mental arousal. That is, this is not completely flaccid, just completely limp and hanging out. There is a degree of effort, but like as if you're tuning a stringed instrument, like a lute, or even harder than that, a sitar. You're stringing it, then that is, you're tuning it. Then see, is this too tight? Is this too loose? Too tight, too loose, and try to find that optimal pitch of attention. It can only be determined in terms of your own experience, but not too tight, not too loose. Also determine in terms of your own experience the healthiest diet and behavior. What type of food is best for your constitution? You might check with a nutritionist or some practitioner of Tibetan medicine, Chinese medicine, and so forth. And behavior, what kind of exercise? Really rigorous exercise, just walking, swimming, yoga, tai chi. Find for yourself what is most supportive for the practice. Then he comments, excessive imprisoning constriction of the mind, loss of clarity due to lassitude, and excessive relaxation resulting in involuntary vocalization and eye movement are to be avoided. So these are faults of the practice. It is possible to do this practice and do it wrong, incorrectly. Those are some of the ways of doing it in a way that will be counterproductive. He also suggests it's counterproductive to talk a lot about such things as extrasensory perception, random dreams, or to make claims, ostentatious claims. I saw God, I saw a deity, I saw a ghost, I know this, I've realized that, and so on. Generally, unless it's with a very close person, like a spouse, a spiritual friend, a teacher, generally the rule of thumb, I think, based upon centuries of experience, good idea not to broadcast one's experiences, one's insights, and so forth. What it does tend to do is reinforce the ego. I'm important, I'm special, I'm superior. You wouldn't believe what happened to me in meditation yesterday. And tie people down and they're struggling and panting to get away. No, you haven't heard all of it yet. It's you haven't recognized how special I really am. So sit tight. I'm about to tell you. All of that is kind of counterproductive to kind of loosening the grip of ego and just kind of being present without that clamping down. So not calling attention to oneself, and I've seen this, I've grown so accustomed to it with my own teachers, with the Dalai Lama and so many other teachers. They're completely self-effacing, which is just a chuckle with a lightness, not any low self-esteem or self-deprecation. They just chuckle and said, nothing special. Or my teacher, Gatrin Butch's favorite phrase, I'm an empty lama sitting on an empty box. So the presence or absence of any kind of pleasure or displeasure, such as a sense of motion, you may experience some very weird somatic experiences through the course of such practice. None of this is uniform, for there are great differences in the dispositions and faculties from one individual to another. This is one of the great qualities, sometimes very troubling qualities, of this practice, is that since you are engaging in free association, it really means it. So the gnarliest, nastiest emotions, the most vile thoughts, as well as the most sublime and pleasant and peaceful and so forth, but you allow it all to come out without editing, without censorship. Well, when that comes out, because of the very close entanglement of the mind and the body, psychological experience, somatic experience, it's very likely that you can experience some weird stuff happening in the body as well. Okay? Some of it might just be weird and odd or fun. Some of it not so much fun. But you just let it be with as little expectation, as little grasping as possible. Just let it move right on through. Due to maintaining the mind in its natural state, simply continuing in this practice over a course of time, there may arise sensations such as physical and mental bliss. Could happen. It just arises spontaneously. And bear in mind, this is not physical or mental bliss because you've taken, some special drug to make you physically blissful, or even any catalyst of some really pleasant thought. Of course you feel happy, or a happy memory, or a happy fantasy. It's not that. It's a sense of bliss that arises just right out of the nature of the mind, not contingent upon some clear objective stimulus of a thought, memory, imagination, sensory impulse, just arising. So you may experience physical and mental bliss. You may experience a sense of lucid consciousness, just a brightness, a radiance of consciousness, the likes of which you've never experienced before. You may experience empty forms, and that is as you're simply witnessing the visual forms around you, instead of them appearing to be so substantial, concrete, tangible, substantial from their own side, they may simply appear more simply like empty forms arising in space, and even tactile sensations. Like here's a form. There's a form of an eyeglass carrier case. So it's brown, it's just a visual image. But then I reach out, and you know what's going to happen. And there was a sensation of firmness there. Now it's very easy for me to reify the visual and think the visual itself is firm and solid, but it's not. The visual is no more substantial than a rainbow, and the tactile sensation itself is no more substantial than an apparition. Bearing in mind, the closest parallel here is in the midst of a dream. One of the methods for determining whether you're dreaming or not that doesn't work, pinch yourself. Pinch yourself in the dream. Am I dreaming? You go, oh, no, that hurt. I guess I'm not dreaming. And then you dream along and you don't get lucidity. Because you can pinch yourself in the dream, you can twist your flesh, you can feel physical pain in a dream. You can walk up to an oak door in a dream and say, gosh, I wonder if I'm dreaming, and then hammer on it, bruise your knuckles on it and say, wow, boy, am I not dreaming. But you are. The visual forms in the dream are empty. There's nothing really there corresponding to them. And even the rap of your knuckles against the oak door in the dream, the sensations are there, but they're empty. There's nothing solid there. You may start experiencing waking reality like that, which you want to handle with a lot of caution, and that is if you see the image of a large Mack truck bearing down on you, assume that the tactile sensations will be very robust, probably unpleasant and to be avoided at all cost. Here's something very important, and this next phrase is almost the reason I would even bother reading this at all, because you're all literate, of course. He said, you may experience a non-conceptual sense that nothing can harm the mind, regardless of whether or not thoughts have ceased. Now that's really a loaded phrase. It's so fascinating that just that one phrase there is worth reading this whole passage. A non-conceptual sense, in other words, non-discursive, non-conceptual, awareness, a certainty, a confidence, that nothing can harm your mind. Now your body, of course, I've got 180 pounds of very vulnerable flesh here. Throw a dart at me and I'll say, ouch. So the body is vulnerable, no question about it. But the mind? Exactly what dart do you throw at the mind that you can be sure you'll hit it and it will cause pain? How about you're a real jerk? You're the biggest jerk I've ever met in my life. Is that a good enough dart? Does it hurt? Maybe, maybe not. But if I were joking, I said, oh, you're such a jerk. You're just such a jerk. Oh, you just make me sick. You're such a jerk. And he's smiling and smiling and smiling. My words are not hurting at all, right? They're words. I mean, it's like echoes. It's like I'm throwing rainbows at you. A rainbow that formed in the first, you're a jerk. As opposed to, you're a lovely person. You're so intelligent, you're creative, you make my day. They're just words. So exactly how is it that words strike the target and give us mental pain? How is it that thoughts strike the target and give us mental pain? How is it dreams strike the target and we experience them as nightmares and wake up in cold sweat because we're grasping onto them? It is just that simple. Right. So, it really is that simple. It's quite amazing. So you may have this non-conceptual confidence, certitude, that nothing can harm your mind. That is, we're speaking now within the domain of the mind. Whatever comes up, an image of a cobra about to strike your face and, sink its fangs into your face. That's pretty unpleasant. But it's a dream cobra. Exactly how is it supposed to harm anything? How is a dream cobra supposed to harm your dream face? Or somebody shouting obscenities at you, or shooting you with a Sherman tank. Exactly how is any of this supposed to be harmed when you recognize the nature of these mental events for what they are? You recognize there's nothing objectively there that can harm your mind. You recognize this intuitively, non-conceptually. Recognize that nothing can harm the mind, and this is the real gist of it. It's not just when the mind is silent. Of course, then why would anything harm the mind when it's silent? There's no bullets being fired. But nothing can harm your mind regardless of whether or not thoughts have ceased. Memories, emotions, and so forth, nothing can harm the mind because you see it for yourself. By attending to these events of the mind without distraction, without grasping, then you see they cannot harm you. I spent 6 months doing this practice, about 8-10 hours a day. It's many years ago now, 14 years ago. Every couple of weeks I'd drive down. I was staying in deep solitude up in the high desert in eastern California. Every 3 or 4 weeks I'd drive down a little pickup truck to a public phone on the backside of the library in this little dinky hick town. And I phoned up my teacher, Gatringabuchi, to talk about my practice, how it was going. And he said, Allan, as you settle into this state of awareness, settling the mind in its natural state, even if 1,000 demons should arise and assault you all simultaneously, gang-bang by demons, they cannot harm you. And then if 1,000 Buddhas should rise up to bless you, they cannot bless you. There's nothing to bless. How are you going to be blessed by an image? How do you get blessed by an image? In a mere appearance. There's nothing to bless you there. It's just an image. And likewise, an image of a demon or a tarantula or a snake or whatever creeps you out. It's just an image. So this is enormously liberating. And again, for those of you who have had lucid dreams or imagine having lucid dreams, you can see the strong parallel. To the extent that you're lucid in the dream, nothing can harm you. You don't even need to change the contents of the dream. You know them for what they are. You know that they're harmless. If that 15-foot crocodile wants to come and bite you in two, let him come for seconds. Because exactly what he's going to bite in two? How many molecules do you have in your body in a dream? Nada. So I think that's a very powerful statement. You may have a non-conceptual sense that nothing can harm the mind regardless of whether or not thoughts have ceased. Then the essence of the practice, whatever kinds of mental events occur, be they gentle or violent, subtle or gross, of long or short duration, strong or weak, good or bad. In all cases, there is simply one practice, one method. Observe their nature and avoid any obsessive evaluation of them as being one thing and not another. So the Beatles refrain, just let them be, let them be. Let the heart of your practice be consciousness in its natural state, limpid and vivid. So the practice really is breathtakingly simple. And it doesn't get more elegant, more sophisticated, harder and harder as you go. It's homogeneous all the way through. You settle the mind in its natural state, you attend without distraction, without grasping. You watch the mind heal, you watch the mind dissolve, you watch your senses implode, and you settle in the relative ground state of your mind, which is blissful, luminous, and quiet. Any question? Oh, the ride may be a bit bumpy. The trajectory there may be a bit bumpy, because what you're doing here is doing something quite spectacular, quite deep. I would say super depth psychology. Because what you're doing in this practice, without really doing much of anything, what you're allowing to happen is you're dredging the psyche. You're dredging the psyche from its depths. Dredging the subconscious. Dredging old impulses, memories, traumas, memories of all kinds. You're dredging, dredging, dredging. Allow it all to come up. Whatever's there, it will manifest. It will come up. And you'll either be present with it and observe the healing process continue, or you'll be caught, snagged up, caught up in it again, at which point, then you either need a therapist or a really good meditation teacher to help you get unsnagged very quickly. Yes?
Why is it blissful? Why is it not neutral?
That's a very good question. And I think it's kind of like asking, why is, in terms of gravitational pull, why is it an inverse square law as opposed to an inverse cube law? It's a fascinating question, and I think the answer is just the way things are. But it's quite a wonderful just the way things are. Because it tells something very, very profound. To my mind, this is just a fact. It's not a belief of some religion versus another religion. It's just a fact. It's been corroborated so many times that that's the way things are. That when the mind comes to the state of equilibrium, bliss just pops out spontaneously. And what that's telling us is volumes about our own nature, the very nature of the mind itself. And this is not the ultimate level. This is just the relative. It's called one Tibetan Lama calls it the ground of the ordinary mind. That out of which your mind, your woman's mind, an American mind, European mind, it emerges every time you wake up, devolves every time you fall asleep, and then emerges repeatedly as you have dream cycles throughout the course of the night. But it's kind of reassuring, at least as a working hypothesis, let alone as an empirical fact, to think, gosh, as I'm pursuing all kinds of things to make me happy, good job, good partner, correct number of children, including 0, and place to live, and all the kind of things we're looking for, acquisitions, people we want to meet, prestige, status, power, influence, all of that in the pursuit of happiness. It's kind of interesting to frame it with a working assumption, and all of that may have value. And in the midst of all of that, the natural state of my mind is already blissful. And all I need to do is stop doing all the stuff I'm doing that obscures the naturally blissful state of my own awareness. So buying a Mercedes-Benz, you need a MasterCard. Buying a really nice baseball bat, MasterCard. Settling your mind in its natural state, priceless. But not free. So acting as your own mentor, that is, it's very useful. I've had wonderful teachers myself, continue to have wonderful teachers myself, and they play an indispensable role. And after they've done their teaching, somebody's got to take responsibility for my practice. And there's only one person who can actually do that, and that's me. So if I don't do it, none of my teachers will. So therefore, he says, acting as your own mentor. Be your own mentor. You've learned the method, you've understood it, you practice it. Acting as your mentor, if you can bring the essential points to perfection, as if you were threading a needle, the afflictions of your own mind stream will subside. Just the sheer magnitude, the volume of negative thoughts, craving, arrogant thoughts, envious thoughts, and so forth, all these thought processes, mental impulses that just throw the mind out of balance, that disturb us, that make us unhappy. These afflictions of the mind naturally subside. The mind is healing itself, almost like an open wound. At least as importantly as that, you will gain the autonomy of not succumbing to them. So, some very afflictive mental impulse arises. Maybe it's resentment. That's not very pleasant. It arises. You're sitting there and something triggers it. Maybe it's a memory, maybe it's seeing somebody, just some thought association, some old resentment comes up. And it's Johnny on the spot. As soon as it arises, you say, oh, you don't have to say it also, but I'll just articulate it. Oh, resentment. I've seen you before. Not particularly good to see you again, but there you are. Oh, you're leaving? Okay, if you wish. Ciao. It arose. It happened. You didn't react to it. You didn't identify with it. You didn't get carried away by it. You noted the impulse of resentment arising. It looked around for something almost like it's got little tentacles, looking for something to latch onto, and you don't give it anything to latch onto. And then it dies a natural death and dissolves right back into the space of the mind. You note it. That's resentment. But the interesting thing about resentment, when you don't grasp onto it, identify with it, it doesn't afflict. And since it doesn't afflict, why would you call it a mental affliction? So actually you detoxify your own mind. Not because suddenly no negative thoughts or afflictive thoughts and emotions arise any longer, but they don't afflict you because you're not identifying with them. So much comes down to grasping. You'll gain the autonomy of not succumbing to them, and your mind will be constantly calm and composed. Your ground state. And I've known a lot of really remarkable beings, that is, people who have spent decades in meditation. Very dedicated spiritual practice. That's one of the great blessings of my life. They don't all walk around in a state of gray emotionally, like just like yesterday's porridge, just slipping through from day to day, like always. I'm calm. I actually never met anybody like that. I mean, people who are brain damaged perhaps, but not meditators. In fact, the meditators I've known who are really, have spent, tens of thousands of hours in practice, have a very robust emotional life. Especially what I find from the Dalai Lama and many others, very easily aroused to laughter, to cheerfulness, to a sense of humor. Really easy. I could tell you stories about how easy it is to get the Dalai Lama to laugh. It doesn't take much. And many of my other teachers too, contemplatives who spent years in solitude, really deep stuff. Not 6 months here, 6 months there, but 6 years here and 12 years there. One of them living on meditation pills in a cave in Tibet for months on end. Heavy-duty people. And yet the lightness, to that, remember the name of that movie, The Unbearable Lightness of Being? That kind of captures it. And it's kind of like, so light, but so radiant, easily joyful. But at the same time, I've seen the Dalai Lama and other teachers of mine just burst into tears. Very meaningful tears. Not tears of, oh, somebody stole my money, or I lost my reputation, or why don't the Chinese government like me? I've never seen him cry about that. But tears about things that are really worthy of tears. That I've seen. So it's not to say when he says constantly calm and composed that you don't have any emotional life anymore. You're kind of suddenly locked into a tight little box. But rather your ground state is one calm. Even when the emotions arise, they don't completely overwhelm you. And certain emotions may just not arise anymore. The Dalai Lama has commented, he never experiences hatred ever. He's had a lot of abuse. He's had an enormous amount of abuse. From the Chinese government especially. They don't get it, that he's actually a very nice person. He's had a very difficult life in some respects. No hatred, and I take that at face value from him. Hatred just doesn't arise. That's something one can expect. A bit of irritation, he said. Once in a while, a bit of irritation arises. Hatred, never. That'd be nice. So such equanimity, such equilibrium of the mind, emotional composure, emotional balance, together with the clarity, the stability, the ease of attention, the clarity of metacognition, so you're aware of what's going on in the mind and can wisely choose which impulses to act upon and which to allow to be virtual impulses, dissolving right back into the space of the mind with no more repercussions. An extraordinary degree of freedom can be achieved through this, as if you were in a lucid dream. This, he says, is a sound basis for the arising of all samadhis of the stages of generation and completion. This is a technical speech from Tibetan Buddhism. What he's saying is that for all the more advanced forms of meditation, including visualization, insight practice, and so forth and so on, this is a sound basis of deep sanity. And so it's great if you're a meditator. It's also great if you're not a meditator. On that note, let's have one more session, and then we'll call it a day. We just have 15 more minutes, but let's have not just a flow of talk. Again, let's begin by rolling out the welcome mat. To make every beginning of every session one that is inviting, not strenuous, demanding, no high standards that we feel we need to live up to. But just immediately let your awareness sink into the body. Feel this whole field of tactile sensations. Set your body at ease. Relax the muscles of your face. Let your body be still once it is comfortable, and assume a posture of vigilance. Attend for the moment to this space of the body, bringing to it this quality of bare attention, and simply noting without reaction, without distraction or grasping, the tactile events or sensations that arise within this field. Attend to them without distraction, without grasping. Just let them be without preference. Note them arise from moment to moment, and simply observe their nature. Very importantly, and yet quite subtly, let your respiration come in subtle in its own rhythm, which is not something static, rather something that shifts through time. Sometimes the breath being shallow, sometimes deep, sometimes regular, sometimes irregular. But whatever it is, let the breath be. Observe it without distraction, without grasping, without preference. Observe the whole field of the body and the ripple effect of the sensations of the breathing as they permeate this field. Your body and mind at ease. Somewhat more narrowly focus your attention on the tactile sensations of the in and out breath as they manifest with the rise and fall of your abdomen. Deeply relaxing and letting go of thoughts with each out breath, and arousing your attention with each in breath. In this way, the stability of attention emerges out of a deep sense of calm and relaxation, rather than at the cost of relaxation. We don't tighten up as the mind, the attention becomes more stable. And then to synergetically, simultaneously cultivate relaxation, stability, and vividness. Give yourself a greater challenge in terms of the subtlety of what you're attending to. Elevate your focus. Attend to the tactile sensations at the apertures of your nostrils, of the in and out breath. Even in between sessions, even between the breaths, you may note an ongoing flow of sensations right at the apertures of the nostrils unrelated to the breathing. To the best of your ability, maintain an unbroken flow of mindfulness, attending to the unbroken flow of sensations both during and between breaths. Arousing with each inhalation, relaxing with each exhalation. And now with the body and mind relatively at ease, inwardly relaxed, let your eyes be at least partially open, your gaze resting vacantly in the space in front of you. And direct your mindfulness in the mode of bare attention to the space of the mind and whatever mental events arise within that space. Observe the comings and goings of the mind without distraction, without grasping. Let your body be still like a mountain, and your awareness still like space. We seek to sustain the flow of mindfulness as continuously as possible. Attending to the space of the mind and its contents, introspection we apply intermittently. Checking up, quality control. Noting as swiftly as possible whether the attention has fallen into distraction, in which case we loosen up, or dullness, in which case we arouse the attention, pay close attention. And let's bring the session to a close. Hola, so. We're just about finished here. To make just a couple of overview comments about the way I presented these theories and practices together. As noted earlier, it's been in a fairly secular fashion. You didn't hear about metaphysical beliefs from Buddhism or any other religious tradition. It's not because I think such beliefs or a theoretical context is irrelevant, very much to the contrary, but I think the practices themselves are so valuable that it would be a shame to present them in such a way that some people feel excluded. Like, oh, I'm not a Tibetan Buddhist, I can't really relate to what you're talking about. Or I'm not a Buddhist, therefore I really can't. That would be a shame. Having said that, for those of you who do come, and I think many of you do, but already having a spiritual practice you bring to today's seminar, then I would invite you wholeheartedly and enthusiastically to incorporate, if you find these practices useful, to incorporate those into your own spiritual practice, not have it being something separate and independent, like some secular method you tack onto your spiritual practice, but embed it thoroughly within that framework. If it's Christian, let it be richly Christian. If it's Buddhist, Theravada Buddhist, Zen, Tibetan, what have you, let it be enriched and cultivated, nurtured by your own worldview, your own spiritual framework. I think that will make the practices themselves much richer. I can certainly say that's what I do myself. My background is largely informed by Tibetan Buddhism, but a lot of Theravada as well. So again, in teaching a secular way, it is not, in no way implies that anything that's outside of the secular is somehow of less value, which I absolutely do not believe. Okay? I think that's pretty much a wrap. Any closing comments or questions that you'd like to share? That is a burning question, you just can't get through the day without it. If there aren't any, you really made my day. It's either a really good thing or a really bad thing. Good. Well, I've enjoyed being with you today. Thank you for coming, and thank you for Kimberly and Vidya, everybody who made it possible. Thank you. I hope there's some benefit. Until next time.